Hi, beautiful people. Welcome to the Fort Salem Library, where we read you your fanfiction. So sit down or don't, relax or don't, and enjoy these stories in a way you have not before. We at Fort Salem Library do not own Motherland Fort Salem or any of the related characters. The Motherland Fort Salem series is created by Elliot Lawrence and owned by Freeform. This story is a work of fanfiction and is meant for entertainment only. We are not making any profit from these stories. All rights of the original Motherland Fort Salem story belong to Freeform. We also do not own Her Song is a Sin, or any of its original characters and storylines. We did, however, get permission from the author to read their story. This story was created and written by Lou1, and you can find the link in our show notes. This story is being read to you by me, Britt. Her Song is a Sin, Chapter 20. Thank the goddess Scylla didn't party for much longer. The addition of the alcohol put a damper on the other drugs, and Raelle and Porter managed to support the musician out of the reception room and to her suite within the hour of the main party ending. Porter supported Scylla while Raelle opened the door to the bedroom, and then they managed to work together to get her undressed. It was becoming a disturbing pattern for the blonde, and she knew that she and Scylla needed to have a serious conversation. Once the musician was cleaned up and in bed, Raelle followed Porter out into the living area. "You want to tell me what you know about this?" Raelle asked. Porter shrugged. "I know Gareth is a rootless son of a bitch that will do anything to keep Scylla under his thumb." Raelle shook her head. "And Beth?" Porter shrugged. "Beth always wanted Scylla, but she never liked her that way. I guess they played around when they were drunk or high, but Scylla never actually wanted anything serious with her." "How long have you known the two of them?" Raelle asked, brow furrowing. Porter swallowed. "We were all friends from back when the Ramshorns moved to the area. I think we were all around 13, 14 years old." "And she was doing drugs then?" Raelle pressed. "Look, we were kids, just doing the stupid stuff kids do. It wasn't serious. And Scylla didn't get into the type of shit we threw away tonight until Garrett came on the scene." Porter shifted. "Look, Raelle, I'm not really the one who needs to be telling you this stuff. It's Scylla's story to tell." "But how bad is this, Porter?" The blonde shook his head. "It could get bad." "Fuck," Raelle answered. They heard a moan from the bedroom and Raelle shook her head. "I better go to her. Be there if she gets sick." "Yeah," Porter answered. "Hey," Raelle said, pausing on her way to the bedroom. "Why wasn't Byron at the reception?" "Oh, he ran into some art friends at the hotel, and they decided to go to some exhibitions. He doesn't really go in for the party stuff," Porter said. "Right," Raelle answered, brow furrowed. When she heard more movement from the bedroom, she shook her head. "We can tell him in the morning. You'd better get some sleep because you'll have to take the next watch." Porter nodded and exited the suite to find his own room down the hall. Raelle walked back into Scylla's bedroom. This time, she didn't even attempt to be gallant and picked a chair by the bed. Instead, she slipped out of her suit and perched on the bed, eyes on the brunette as she tossed and turned under the covers. The sun was coming through the windows when a groan beside her made Raelle's eyes snap open. "The fucking light," Scylla mumbled. "Make it go away." Raelle slipped out of the bed and walked over to the large windows, closing the blackout shades and plunging the room into darkness. Taking a step back to the bed, she stumbled and immediately realized it wasn't the smartest move that she'd made. She stood still, allowing her eyes to adjust to the darkness, and made her way over to a corner table where she turned on a lamp, casting the room in a low amber glow. "Do you need anything?" Raelle asked. "Yeah, a fucking drink." "I've got water, or I can order you breakfast from room service." At the suggestion of breakfast, Raelle watched the brunette grow pale and she frowned. So the pain began. "Why are you here?" Scylla asked. "Because I love you, you idiot," That's what Rael wanted to say. Instead, she shrugged. I'm here to keep you safe. Scylla let her head fall back on the pillow and mumbled. Does that include keeping me safe from myself? When necessary, though I don't think you did this to yourself, Rael answered. Scylla snorted and then regretted it as pain flared in her sinuses. So someone force-fed me coke? Rael's jaw clenched. You were high long before you touched that stuff. What are you talking about? I didn't take anything until Beth. Oh, God, just never mind. Just get me Garrett. Rael's eyes darkened, and she shook her head. I don't think that's a good idea. And why the fuck not? Scylla asked. Because you need rest. You still have a show tonight. And then I want to get you back to the mansion. Why? Scylla asked. So you can take some time off, and so we can talk. Scylla swallowed hard. She was already having flashes from the night before, and the more she remembered, the more she dreaded any type of talk that Rael would have with her. Surely she would leave her now. There was a soft knock at the door, and Rael looked at Scylla. I'll go get that. Fine, Scylla answered, wanting a drink, wanting to get high, wanting to desperately get away from Rael seeing her like this. Instead of immediately going to the door, Rael went into what was supposed to be her bedroom and got dressed in a pair of sweats and a t-shirt that had been in her go-bag. When she opened the door to the suite, Byron was standing there with Porter, Isadora, and Moffat. I didn't want to wait, Porter said. I'm sorry if I should have. Oh, Porter, you did the right thing. They all filed into the living area, and Byron made a step toward Scylla's bedroom before changing his mind and taking a seat on a chair by the couch. The others found seats, and Byron spoke up. How is she? Nauseated? Sensitivity to light? Cravings? Oh, goddess. Byron shook his head. I can't stand to see her do this again. How bad was it last time? Rael asked. Bad, Byron answered. A few really close calls. Rehab? Yes, Isadora answered. Swithe Records insisted on it. Will this affect her contract now? Rael asked. No, Isadora shook her head. She's been clean for so many years that the current contracts don't contain any type of clauses. And Garrett? What about him? Isadora asked. He's the one who did this to her. He did it before, and you all knew, and did nothing? Byron shook his head. Scylla wanted the drugs, and Garrett knew how to supply them. And you think that addiction just comes from nowhere? Isadora shrugged. Unfortunately, it's a part of the scene, Rael. Once Scylla became popular, she had exposure to a lot of that stuff. But you said she hasn't done it in years, and she was high long before she got access to the drugs in the private room. Garrett, that's slimeball, Moffat said. What? Rael asked. She was fine when she came off stage for the intermission. Hot and thirsty, sure, but she was okay. Then Garrett started giving her bottles of water. You're saying Garrett drugged my sister? Byron asked, his voice low. Moffat nodded. I'd bet it on my life. And so she was already weak when Beth took over. He got her high. Got her to make a scene, Rael said. Just like the old days, Porter agreed. Isadora shook her head. He'll do anything to see her name buzzing in the press. He's relentless about her winning an Oscar this year. This has gone too far. There were enough drugs in that room last night to kill an army. He could have killed her. It's reckless endangerment at the least, Rael said. Byron shook his head. She'll never fire him. Technically, she can't. His contract is ironclad for another 2 years, Isadora answered. He can break it off, but if she does, the consequences are pretty lengthy, Byron added. Then we will just have to get him to quit, Rael answered. Maybe after she gets the Oscar, but he won't quit before then. Isadora answered. What if she just quits? No more songs, no more records? Rael asked. Then her life as she knows it is essentially over, Byron answered. I'm sorry, Rael, but it is who she is. Surely she isn't going to do this for the rest of her life, Rael asked. Byron and Isadora exchanged glances, and Rael leaned back on the couch, exhaustion finally coming over her, She hadn't thought about what falling in love with the musician might really mean, that this would be what a life with her would be like for the inconceivable future. "Do you want me to take over watching her?" Porter asked. Raelle shook her head. "We should order some breakfast and go over the details for the day. She should be safe enough with all of us in here. Then I can take a nap." Everyone placed their orders with Raelle and she made the call to room service. When a knock sounded on the door to the suite a few minutes later, the bodyguard was surprised by the quickness of the service. Porter opened the door and Garrett walked in, smiling broadly. "Oh, good. The crew's all here." The publicist strode forward and dropped several newspapers on the table, all with pictures and write-ups of the concert on the covers. "I'd say we'd better make room for that Oscar now," Garrett said, grinning. When no one spoke up or smiled back, Garrett looked around. "What's the matter with all of you? Still keep you up half the night?" The publicist laughed, and he didn't even have time to process Raelle's movements. Before he knew it, the bodyguard lunged from the couch and pushed Garrett against the door of the suite, hand around his throat. "You shady piece of shit!" Raelle yelled at Garrett, pushing him up against the door. "Fuck! Get your hands off me! What are you talking about?" "Are you trying to kill her? I should have saved your party favors from last night, so I could have shoved them down your throat." The bodyguard had a blanket of hatred covering her as she looked at the publicist. Byron and Porter both stepped forward, grabbing at the bodyguard's shoulders, trying to pull Raelle back. Eventually, they got her away, and Isadora stepped between them before Raelle could start swinging. Oh, I was doing my job. I'm the best at what I do. Get off your white pony and understand this is our reality. It's fucking show business, babe." "It might be your reality, but it doesn't have to be hers. You're a slithering snake. She thought your waters were clean. You deliberately gave a recovering addict more drugs." The more Raelle thought about what Garrett had been doing, the more her rage came flooding back. Her jaw clenched, and she attempted to maneuver around Isadora, but Byron was a lot stronger than he looked. Before Raelle could slip by him, Byron wrapped his arms around the bodyguard's waist and interlocked his fingers. Byron hissed in her ear, "This isn't the answer, Raelle." When Scylla walked out of the bedroom, at the sound of the scuffle, she found her brother's arms around her bodyguard's waist, and the rest of the crew warily watching as Garrett looked like he was about to be attacked. "Byron, what the fuck are you doing?" "Scylla, babe," Garrett called out, smiling and stepping forward. The musician had distracted her brother enough that he'd loosened his grip on Raelle, and the bodyguard stepped forward, fist making contact with the publicist's nose. There was an audible crack, and the publicist started screaming. Everyone watched in horror as Raelle stepped forward again, intending on continuing her attack. "Stop it, Raelle!" The crew started to rush her, ready to intervene, but Scylla's voice had already made the blonde stand still. "This bastard drugged you," Raelle said, her voice dangerously calm. The bodyguard's eyes were cold, locked on Garrett. From her position standing near the commotion, Moffat nodded her head vigorously. "He did, Syl. He put something in your water." Scylla's eyes closed, the light and the commotion making her head pound. Another wave of nausea hit her. "It doesn't matter." "What the fuck do you mean, it doesn't matter?" Raelle asked, shock in her voice. Scylla shook her head and directed her question to the publicist. "What's the word?" Garrett tried to grin, but ended up wincing. He pulled a handkerchief from his suit jacket and carefully dabbed at his nose. "Fort Salem was the place to be last night, and you put on one hell of a party." The musician swallowed and nodded her head. "Fine. Get in here and get cleaned up. We need to talk about tonight." With a smirk, Garrett walked past Raelle and the rest of the crew and followed Scylla back into her bedroom and closed the door. Another knock sounded at the door, and Raelle, still standing, stepped forward and opened it. She moved aside to allow the servers to walk in with a couple of dining carts and then looked down at the crew who had settled back down. "I'll be back later," Raelle said. "What?" Byron asked. "Where are you going?" "I'm going to walk the route." "Raelle," Porter protested. "You're exhausted. You can't." "You think I can sleep after that?" Raelle shook her head. "Watch her until I get back. Do not let her have access to anything." Porter nodded. "I promise." Rael, Isadora began. Don't, Isadora. We talked about this. The blonde exited the suite, and Byron looked at the manager. You talked about what? Isadora sighed. That Rael will not tolerate any use of illicit substances by her clients because of the security risks that it creates. And if she suspects that they are using, her contract at her discretion can be null and void. Oh, goddess, Byron groaned. She can't quit now, can she? Moffat asked. Not with someone trying to kill Scylla. Porter frowned. Yeah, you mean 2 people. What? Isadora asked, looking over at Porter, who had never really been known to join in a meaningful conversation. There's a psycho that wants her dead, and her publicist is willing to ruin her with drugs if it means he can control her enough to do things his way so that she wins an Oscar. Porter shrugged. So really, there's 2 people. Byron looked over at Porter, surprised how under Rael's tutelage he had grown. In truth, he could think of a little dozen ways that they were all better with Rael among them, especially Scylla, until Garrett intervened. The security man shrugged and walked over to the breakfast trays. Oh, they have steaks and eggs. Porter grabbed a plate and opened another section of the mobile buffet. And hash browns. Isadora looked over at Byron, and they shared a smile. The manager shrugged and went over to the buffet and joined Porter in getting some breakfast. Well? Garrett asked, standing at the bathroom door and looking at Scylla as she perched on the side of the bed. Scylla shrugged. Not a doctor, but yeah, I would say it's broken. That bitch, Garrett muttered and walked back into the bathroom. He gingerly cleaned the blood from his nose with a washcloth. Don't call her that, Scylla said, her head still pounding. She's gonna ruin you, babe, Garrett called out from the sink in the bathroom, trying to reason with Scylla. You're on a roll, on your way to get the Oscar. Her presence here is only holding you back. It's a distraction you don't need. Scylla shook her head. I love her. Garrett sighed and walked back to the bedroom. I don't know why. She judges you. She thinks she's better than you. Better than all of us. She doesn't think that, Scylla said. But in truth, the brunette wasn't so sure. Rael had been among veterans and doctors last night, heroes. And what was she? A former junkie musician who sometimes acted. Sure, she had a degree, actually a couple. But Garrett didn't dare let her tell anyone about it. That would certainly destroy the image she'd worked so hard to build. All you did last night was have a good time. It was your concert, your party. You had a right to have a good time. And if she really loved you, then why wasn't she on your arm? Why was she with that doctor woman? Garrett's voice brought Scylla out of her foggy thoughts, and she looked up as he droned on. Now here she is today, trying to control you, trying to keep you in here, hide you away like you're some kind of embarrassment. The musician frowned. It was hard to focus, hard to think when all she wanted was another hit, a drink, anything to take the edge off. Garrett recognized the look in Scylla's eyes, and his hand reached for a small bag he had in his pocket, and he put it beside her on the bed. She doesn't get to decide what's best for you, babe. Scylla looked at the bag, her heart racing. You're a fucking star, babe. She's the one who's nothing. Scylla swallowed, eyes still focused on the bag. Garrett smiled. Get yourself together, love. Do what you need to do to feel better. One more night and you can have a few weeks off. Satisfied he had the musician where he wanted her, he opened the door to the bedroom and walked into the living area. He glanced around, wary that the bodyguard would be waiting for him, but was pleased to see that she was gone. He was confident that the rest of the crew would get in line. They needed Scylla to be successful too. He saw that everyone was eating breakfast and walked over to one of the trays to get himself a cup of coffee. Byron stood, leaving his half-full plate. I should go check on Scylla. She's fine, Garrett said. She's going to take a nice nap, rest for the concert tonight. Still, I should. Leave her be, Byron, Garrett said, sitting down with his coffee. Byron shifted on his feet, uncertain what would be best for his sister. Eventually he nodded. Fine. You're going to take the watch, right, Porter? The blonde looked up from his plate, mouth full, but nodded vigorously. Okay, I'm going to go then. Isadora, think you could come with? And let's go over some stuff. Isidore nodded. Sure, Byron. Moffat also made her excuse and left the room. Garrett chuckled when it was just Porter and himself left in the room. I guess I'm not the most popular guy right now. Porter looked at Garrett, anger flashing in his eyes. You could have fucking killed her, man. Garrett shrugged. We both know she's too smart for that. She knows her limits. Porter shook his head. I'm not sure about that. Not when it comes to all this stuff with Raelle. And that's the problem, isn't it? Garrett said. When it was just us, Scylla did fine. Now that Raelle's here, she's a mess. She's lost her focus. What we need, Porter, is you in charge of her security again. Porter looked at Garrett, recognizing what the publicist was trying to do. I'm always here for Scylla, Garrett. You know that. Good, Garrett answered. He put his cup of coffee down on the tray. Good, he repeated. I think that the head position is going to be open soon. Since we seem to understand each other, I'll make sure it goes to you. Porter nodded and watched the publicist leave the room. As soon as the door closed, he walked to Scylla's room and knocked. When there was no answer, he opened the door just enough to poke his head inside the room and found the musician staring at something on the bed. When he walked in the room, he saw the bag of drugs. Scylla, Porter said. When there was no response, he raised his voice. Syl. The musician looked up, eyes a million miles away. Hey, Porter. The blonde walked into the room and sat beside the musician on the bed. Cautiously, he reached out and took the bag and put it in his pocket. Scylla swallowed hard and then looked up at her childhood friend. Thank you, she whispered. What can I do to help you, Scylla? Porter asked. The musician swallowed several times. She was still sick, but she couldn't stand to just stay in her hotel suite, locked up all day. I need to get out of here. I need to get away from everyone. Raelle, Garrett, Byron. I just need to go somewhere. Do something. Porter nodded slowly. Okay, but you need to eat. You need to get some fluids in you. Okay, Scylla agreed. And you can't run away from me. I swear, Syl, if you try, I'll tackle you to the ground myself. Scylla laughed, taking her security's Garrett's hand and giving it a squeeze. I promise. Porter waited on the brunette as she showered and dressed. When she came out of the bathroom, she was wearing a pair of jeans and a university sweatshirt. She had her hair back in a ponytail, and he offered her a ball cap. Not wanting to be caught with the drugs on his person, he put the bag on the nightstand on his way out of the room. Raelle had walked the route, and then she'd walked it again. She was about to make a third trip when her brain kicked in and she decided to try and track down Alder and Tally to get a different perspective of the situation. It wasn't difficult to find that room, and when she entered, they were having their own room service. Tally insisted that she eat and have some coffee, and they talked about what had happened the night before. Unfortunately, the three of them couldn't come up with any solution to get rid of Garrett. At least, not one that wouldn't lead to Brunette getting in trouble herself. After the meal, Alder suggested that Raelle take a nap on their couch, and for once, the bodyguard thought that the older FBI agent had made a decent suggestion. She needed perspective that only distance from the situation could provide. She texted Porter, and he had answered back, immediately ensuring that he was watching the musician and that she was safe, and so Raelle decided to take the offer and relax back on the couch. Scylla was starting to feel partially normal. The brunch at the cafe had helped, and Porter made sure she had plenty of water to flush out of her system. They'd walked downtown, the crisp fall air and exercise doing Scylla some good. There was still that nagging sensation every now and again, the pull to use, but the brunette had been down this road before. She focused on her breath, on getting through the moment, and Porter was actually a great distraction. Despite what a lot of people thought, he did use his brain for more than a hat rack, and they chatted easily as they walked along the streets. Eventually, they entered a locally owned bookshop. The musician was in her happy place, browsing the shelves, a cup of tea in hand, and handing a book here and the book there to Porter to hold for later purchase. When she put an art book she'd picked out for her brother on the growing pile of books to purchase, and Porter grunted, she looked up and met his eyes with an apologetic expression. I guess we should get back, Scylla said. Yeah, Porter answered, hefting the books in his arms. Scylla offered to take a few of them back, and together they made their way to the checkout counter. As the cashier checked them out, Scylla tried to avert her gaze to avoid recognition. There were so many books that the cashier offered to box them and meet them around the side entrance with the car. They agreed, and a few minutes later, Porter pulled the car he'd rented at the hotel counter around to the loading dock. After putting the boxes inside the trunk, the cashier looked up at Scylla and Porter and grinned. "That was a great song the other day. I really hope it was about your bodyguard. She seemed sweet." Scylla's eyes widened, and Porter looked like he was about to tackle the teen, but the musician just smiled. "Thank you. It was, and she's pretty wonderful." The teenager smiled. "It's hard, being gay. You've really inspired me to be true to myself and to speak my truth to others. To hold out for that one special girl. Thank you, Mrs. Ramshorn." Scylla swallowed, tears unexpectedly coming to her eyes as she thanked the teenager. In the car on the way back to the hotel, the musician was quiet for a long time, thinking about what a mess she'd made of things and wondering how she'd ever be able to fix them. In the end, the teenager's words rang over and over in her mind. She needed to be truthful. Rael's eyes widened when she stepped off of the elevator and did not see any of the security that would be in place. She rushed down the corridor, pulling the key card out of her pocket as she hurried down the hall. Nearly falling in her rush to get through the door, she began calling Scylla's name. No one was there. Not Porter, not Scylla. After searching the suite from top to bottom and finding nothing but a damn bag of drugs, Rael made her way back down the hall, banging on doors. Isadora emerged first, and she looked at Rael in alarm. "What's wrong? Where is she?" Byron stepped out of his room next and asked, "What's wrong? Where's Scylla?" Moffat came out of her room last and looked around. "What's happened?" Rael looked back and forth, no one seeming to know anything. She strode down the hall and banged on Garrett's door, but there was no answer. She reached for her cell phone and called Porter, but the phone only rang once and went to voicemail. "He's not answering," Rael said, trying to keep her panic that she felt out of her voice. Byron tried Scylla on her cell, placing the call on speaker, and they all listened as the echoing of the phone ringing could be heard in the hallway. Eventually, the musician's voicemail message filled the hall, and Rael shook her head in frustration. She walked over to a house phone and jerked it up, demanding to speak to Mark Neal. "Where's your security on the floor? Has anyone seen Ramshorn?" Rael yelled as soon as the man picked up. She listened to him stutter for a moment and interrupted. "Get someone up here now." He muttered a few more minutes and then promised that guards were on the way. "Okay, I'm coming down to review the footage." "What?" Byron began. "I'm going to the security office to view the feed. Try to trace her steps." Rael turned to Isadora. "Stay here and let me know." As Rael spoke, they could hear the sound of the elevator doors, and all heads turned to Scylla and Porter emerge, both laughing and carrying boxes. Scylla looked at the expression on Rael's face and asked, "What's wrong?" Porter smiled nervously at Rael, who turned her pale eyes on him. He'd only seen her eyes like that one other time, the night he had challenged her. "I'm sorry, Rael, Scylla?" Byron called out. "Where the hell did you go?" Scylla put the box of books down at the door to her suite and then shrugged. "I needed some fresh air. Porter took me shopping." She gestured at the blonde who'd put another couple of boxes down just inside of the suite. "You're not supposed to do that," Isadora chided. Scylla scoffed. "I'm not a child. I can go wherever I want." Rael's pale eyes turned on Scylla, and the musician took a step back. She'd never seen that look before, and she felt herself shudder. "We had a deal. I keep you safe. You follow the protocols. There's a hell of a lot going on right now." "You think I don't know that?" Scylla asked, her voice raising. "Between you and Garrett, it's too fucking much. I needed to get some fresh air." "You sure you weren't looking for more of this?" Rael reached into her pocket and tossed a bag of drugs at Scylla's feet. The brunette blanched, seeing the drugs again, and swallowed. She started to speak, but Rael interrupted her. "You keep pulling this shit, I'll walk," Rael said. Scylla's eyes widened, sensing her fears being realized. She spoke before she thought. "You work at my pleasure. You're under contract." From their suite doors, Byron and Isadora exchanged nervous glances. Both were terrified at what the blonde would say, but after staring at Scylla for a long moment, she shook her head and turned on her heel. "Where the fuck are you going?" Scylla asked. "To check the route. To do my fucking job." Brielle entered the elevator and left Scylla standing in the hallway with her stunned crew. Brielle checked the route again. Several crates had been put in the primary escape route, and Brielle's jaw clenched in anger. She'd called Neil, but the call went straight to voicemail. She moved the boxes and continued walking. She had to ask 3 people to get the fuck out of the way, and the security that were supposed to be present were nowhere in sight. Was anyone but her fucking competent? Stepping out into the lobby, she heard a voice she recognized and turned her pale gaze on Garrett. She watched as he stood by the entrance to the hotel lounge, chatting away with none other than Beth Treefine. The blonde stiffened as she watched him until the woman gave Garrett a kiss on the cheek and headed back down one of the halls leading to the guest rooms. The bodyguard watched him enter the lounge, buy a drink at the bar, and then retreat to the corner booth. She followed his direction, asking for a drink, and then approaching the booth. She slid into the seat and looked at the publicist. "What do you want?" Garrett asked, his voice a squeak when he saw the blonde. He looked like he wanted to run, but the publicist had nowhere to go. "Don't you think it's time that you and I had a little chat? A discussion to clear up our communications problem. You touch me again and I'll sue you. Garrett, shut up and listen. You won't sue me or anyone attached to this crew. If you try to hurt me, if you try to get me fired, I'll sue whoever I have to," Garrett said, trying to sound a hell of a lot braver than he felt with Brielle's ice-blue eyes staring at him. Brielle continued to watch him, waiting for the right moment. She picked up her drink, not really tasting the whiskey, and then put it back down. "Garrett, you don't need to be fired. And I don't have to touch you. You can just leave. Disappear." "Why would I do that?" Garrett asked. Brielle shrugged. "Well, despite what you think, I do understand the job you do, how important it is. It's all about the narrative. You create a character, and you get an actress to fit the part. Even you play a role. You act as a great discoverer of female talent. You're a real ladies' man. Until you go back to your room at night." Garrett picked up his glass and took a nervous drink. "What are you talking about?" Brielle smiled, and it was the scariest thing that Garrett had ever seen in his life. She took another sip of her whiskey and then spoke over the glass. "You know what I mean." She drained the glass and put it down. "I'm sure Byron wasn't the first, and he's certainly not the current acquaintance that you have." "You're full of shit," Garrett answered. "Well, Garrett, it doesn't really matter if you leave or if you just disappear. What you will not do is ever try to drug Scylla again. You will not force her to play music she hates or act in a manner that fits your little narrative unless it's something she wants to do. You do your 2 years playing on golf courses around the world on Scylla's dime and still get paid until the contract ends. Then, you simply go away." "And that's what Scylla wants?" Garrett asked. Brielle didn't speak, and after a moment, Garrett laughed. "Oh, she didn't send you on this mission, did she? No. You're trying to be a knight riding in on your white horse again." Garrett snorted. "What you don't understand, Brielle, is Scylla likes the narrative. She enjoys the fame, the fucking, the drugs. See, it's all the same to her. Scylla Ramshorn likes to get high. The method doesn't matter that much to her, and she doesn't really care who gets hurt as long as she gets off. That's the real genius in what I do. I don't create a story and find an actress to play the part. I bring out their truth. Their story is what they choose. I'm just here to bring it to life and sell it." He watched the press footage in his car on his laptop. He'd parked in McDonald's close to the hotel and watched again and again as Scylla sang the song. It was all lies. 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 That's all the demon knew. Her whole house was full of lies. The witch had never loved anyone. She defiled and destroyed those around her. The poor blonde angel would just be another one of her victims. He knew he couldn't save her now. It was too late. He had bided his time, waiting for the perfect moment for his next gift. Tonight, yes. It was the perfect time. He would remind her of what she was, and of the death and destruction that her words brought to the world. Reaching over to the passenger seat, he picked up a small burner phone and sent a link. Riel thought about what the publicist had said, and she made her way through the hotel and back up to the elevator to Scylla's suites. She wrestled with the decision over and over again. She considered what was at stake and the reality of her limitations. She absently nodded at the security people, finally in place, as she stepped off of the elevator and made her way to Isadora's room. She just knocked when the manager stepped outside of Scylla's room, her face pale. "Oh, thank God, you're here." "I quit," Riel said. "I'll get you back to the mansion, but then I'm done." The manager's eyes widened. "You can't quit now." "Not now. She got another message." "I don't care." "I don't believe that," Isadora challenged. "It doesn't really matter, does it? I can't be responsible for her safety when she does nothing to help herself, when she acts in a way that makes it impossible for me to protect her. You can't. I can. You wrote the clause." "Please, Riel." The manager followed Riel into Scylla's suite, and the blonde found Scylla in the living area sitting in a chair and staring blankly at her wall, her phone in her hand. The bodyguard looked around the room, glancing at Byron, and then her eyes landed on Porter. "Where's the doll?" "What?" Porter asked, confusion on his face. "Isadora said that Scylla got another message. Where's the doll and the note?" Porter shook his head. There was no doll. No note. Riel looked at Isadora and shook her head. Then what the hell? It was a video. "What?" Riel asked. She walked over to Scylla, who still hadn't acknowledged her presence, and crouched down beside the chair. "Scylla, show me." Wordlessly, the musician handed her phone over to Riel. The bodyguard stood and looked at the screen. It looked like Scylla had received a text message with a link and had opened it. Looking around the room, Riel hit the play button, and everyone in the room instantly flinched. The horrific screams began almost immediately, loud and incessant. She watched as the word naughty was carved into Penelope Silver's chest. The camera was at an odd angle, deliberately placed to hide anything that could be used to identify the perpetrator or the location. The screams continued, and after a few moments the angle of the camera changed. She knew what would happen next. What surprised her was the shoes. She recognized them instantly as the shoes that Scylla had lost at Beltane. With her jaw clenched, she saw the blade and heard the sickening crunch of bone. The feet were removed and the screen went black. When the door to the suite opened, everyone with the exception of Riel jumped. She was too busy processing what she had seen, considering the options, running scenarios in her mind. Miss Ramshorn?" The armed security guy looked around the room and Riel answered. "What is it, Jack?" Riel asked, recalling his name from the initial security briefing with Neil. "The lobby sent up this package for Miss Ramshorn." "I said no gift, Jack. There's no flowers, no candy, no packages." "Oh, it's not a gift, Miss Caller. The lobby said that the car rental place sent it over. It got left in the car when some guy named Porter returned it." Hearing his name, Porter looked up at the box and recognized it immediately as being one of the boxes from the bookshop. "Oh, man, I must have missed it." "Are you sure?" Riel asked Porter. "Yeah, that's one of the boxes from the bookshop." He walked over to the guard and took it from him, frowning at the weight. He put it down on the coffee table. "It's a little light, though. I sure hope nobody messed." Riel tried to step forward, tried to stop Porter from opening the box, but by the time she'd reached him, it was too late. The blonde peered into the box, confused by what he saw, and he started to reach his hand out. "Stop!" Riel yelled. Porter looked up and Riel shook her head. "Step away from it, Porter. Now." The other people in the room watched, frozen and unsure of what to do. The tone in Riel's voice had drawn Scylla's attention, though, and the brunette watched intently as Riel walked over to the box and peered inside. The overhead lights in the suite were caught and reflected by the sequence of Scylla's shoes. Inside the shoes, there's flesh, jagged and torn skin. The gift included feet. Does this box contain Penelope Silver's remains? The next hour was a blur as Riel sprang into action, first sending Scylla into her bedroom with Porter standing watch, and then calling Telly Stell. Thank the goddess that they had decided to stay for the second night of the concert, and they were at the suite within minutes of her call. The evidence collection team came next and everyone was interviewed. As things wrapped up and the evidence was removed, Alder walked over to Rael. This was timed too well. I know, Rael answered, nodding at the FBI agent. He's close. Very close. Most likely in the general area. I need to get her out of here. Alder nodded. Somewhere he won't know. Somewhere you can keep her safe. I don't know that she'll... If she wants to live, she'll go. If not, make her go anyway, Telly said, walking up to the pair. Cognizant of the FBI agent still milling around the room, Rael nodded and offered her friend a hand. Telly took it and gave it a firm shake. Be safe, Ray. Call me as soon as you have something. Alder nodded. I will. You do the same. After the agents left, Rael met with Isadora and Byron. They spoke for several minutes, and then Rael walked to Scylla's bedroom door. She took a deep breath and entered the room. She found the musician sitting on the bed and jerked her head at Porter, who nodded and left the room. She tried to think about what she would say, how she could convince Scylla to do what must be done to keep her safe. Scylla, the bodyguard began. Rael, Scylla answered, looking up at the blonde. Please don't quit. The blonde's brow furrowed, and she looked at Scylla. I know you have the right. Isadora told me about the claws, but I'm begging you not to go. I'm not leaving. No matter my title, my priority, the only thing that I've wanted is to protect you. Leaning down in front of Scylla, Rael held her hands, and this time she looked up at the musician. But I cannot protect you like this. Out here in your world, he's got all the X's, all the advantages. Come with me right now. Let me take you somewhere I can keep you safe, where I won't let anything happen to you. You want me to cancel my concerts? Scylla asked. Rael closed her eyes, offering a silent prayer to whatever deity was listening. I know it's a lot to ask. Okay, Scylla answered. Rael's eyes opened and she met Scylla's clear, cerulean gaze. Okay? Yes, I'll do whatever you tell me to do. Rael nodded. Give everyone vacations and get rid of Garrett. Can Byron come with us? Scylla asked. Rael nodded. Yeah, Scylla nodded. Okay. Rael squeezed Scylla's hand and then let go and stood up. I need to make a call. As Rael left the bedroom, Porter reached out an arm and stopped her. Byron told me what you've got planned. Is she gonna do it? Yeah, Porter. She's going to walk away from this. The sadness in her voice surprised her, but then again, she'd just asked the woman she loved to give up everything she'd worked for and had known. Let me come, Ray, please. Rael looked at Porter and nodded. I wouldn't want to do it without you. Porter smiled and offered his hand. Rael shook it and walked to her own bedroom to call her father. As soon as everything was confirmed and the arrangements were made, the crew worked to get everything packed. Isadora and Moffat would return to the mansion with Helen in the limo, leaving Scylla, Byron, Porter, and Rael, who would ride to the private airport in Alder's car, with Tally following as an escort. Garrett? Well, Garrett could find his own way to hell. Please find the fanfiction you just listened to on Archive of Our Own and leave the author some love. Without them, this wouldn't be possible, and we want to thank them from the bottoms of our hearts for creating these amazing stories and keeping the show alive.